Welcome to Widowed Too Soon, where real-life widows and widowers come together to share their stories of survival, faith, and the journey of finding hope in the darkest of times. Whether you're newly widowed or have been on this journey for some time, each week we're here to provide you with inspiration, practical advice, and the reassurance that you are not alone. You were made to not only survive, but thrive. And now here's your host, a woman who has walked this path herself, who finds solace in writing, joy in speaking, and freedom in dancing like nobody's watching. Michelle Bader Ebersole.
Welcome to Widowed Too Soon. This is Michelle Bader Ebersole. I am so excited because I'm coming back with another interview. I know for a little bit I haven't had them because I've been launching my book and things like that. But this one I'm really excited about, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But as of this recording, so we're recording this in May, it is the day after launch. It's May 24th, and my book, Widow Goals, Steps to Finding Peace When You Lose Your Spouse, has just launched. And as of this morning, we were at #1 new release in death, grief, and spirituality, which is the category I want to rank for. What I really want is to be #1, not new release, just #1. But I'm very pleased. I think we had like 80 sales somewhere around there. Well, a lot of them are trickling in. People have told me they ordered them, but they haven't come through. And also 15 reviews. So thank you for all of you who have helped this launch. Next week is my actual launch in person, which I'm very excited about. So if you haven't read the book, check it out. I have a ton of people who said it's helped them. So I'm really, really excited. But I've done episodes about that, so I don't need to go into detail. You guys know about the book if you're a podcast listener. So today we're going to get into talking with my guest. Oh, actually, back it up. I also want to talk about, yesterday was the 5-year, that's kind of bigger, the 5-year anniversary of Luke's death, and just what that was like for me. I was so busy, I didn't have time to process. I only had 4 hours of sleep. I couldn't sleep thinking about what day it was, with both the emotions of the 5-year and also the book launch. So there's so many things. I woke up at 5 a.m. and I was like, I can't go back to sleep. He died at 6:15 a.m. I have to be awake. It's just this weird thing. I always have to be awake. And didn't sleep much. Took Haley to the grave. My boys do not like to go. They haven't been since the beginning, but she likes to go. Normally she likes to go by herself, but this year she wanted to go with me. So that was kind of special, sharing that with her, but very like somber and, hard. All the kids said this year was harder with it being 5 years. And then something we all had in common is we felt like a lot of people forgot and we had hurt feelings. I made a video of Luke and I texted to some friends and family who did not respond. And I'm dealing with that hurt right now, but I know people care. They just get busy. So that was a little bit difficult. And then we ended up going to Red Robin, which is Luke's favorite restaurant, and shared what we wanted to tell him that happened in the last year that we're proud of. And then we came home and we have this little fire pit outside and we had s'mores and just had a good time. And Joel gives us the space to process on our own. And then today we are going to the beach, Seaside, Oregon, which was Luke's favorite beach to go to. And Joel's not going, he's letting us go. And so there's a little area where you can paint rocks in memory of people. And we're going to do that and leave those. So it's going to be a great weekend of continuing to remember Luke. Just wanted to mention that. Okay, so today I have with me Weston Brandon, who comes from Utah, and he reached out to me and he has an inspiring story to share. And as you guys know, we don't have as many widower guests, and I'm just really excited that he's here to connect with us. So how are you today, Weston?
Doing great. Thank you.
Yes. What's the weather out there in Utah today? What's it like? Is it cold?
It's a little overcast. No, it's perfect. Some people would think it's a little cold, but I'm a hot body. So if it's 58, 60 degrees outside, I'm happy.
You're perfect. Yeah.
We're mid-60s right now.
Yes. Well, I forgot to ask you this offline, but I can ask you here. How did you find the podcast? I'm always curious.
I hunted it down. I didn't know what it was. I mean, when I first became a widower, looking for some resources for widowers, and there was
not much.
Basically nothing.
Right? Yeah.
And so then, we'll get into my story later, but then I had a crazy experience where I was like, I need to get my story out, Yeah. And so I had left a bunch of, not left, but like unfollowed in a bunch of widow support groups and things. So I was like, let's get back into it. Let's see what's going on. And then I went on, there's a website, some software that you can use to search up different podcasts for different,
Oh, I gotta learn about that.
things and whatnot, and kind of see what their listening base is and kind of what they talk about. So of course I'm looking, I'm like, what are some
Like,
good
yeah.
widower podcasts that I can
Yeah.
follow and listen to, kind of see what's going on in the
Mm-hmm.
community nowadays. So then yours is one of them that popped up, and I was like, sweet, I'm going to join. And I was like, oh, she's got a Facebook group for this. Like, perfect.
Yes.
And then I was like, I'll shoot her an email and see if
Yeah.
my story is something that she wants to share. So here we are.
Here we are. Well, I'm glad that you found us. We have a lot of people that can use your story. So I know we have a lot to cover. So let's just dive right into it. And I'm learning along with the listeners. So tell us about your late wife and how you met and your story with her.
Okay. So I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I served a mission for 2 years, knocking on doors, teaching people about Jesus. Came back from that, and I was at a church building for a meeting. I was actually attending. I used to attend some addiction recovery meetings before I left on my mission, because I struggled with some pornography issues when I was in high school and stuff. And so when I came back from this, I'm like, I'm just gonna go kind of support other guys dealing with that, just so it helps me kind of stay in a good place. So I was leaving one of these meetings at the church building, and there were some people in playing volleyball in the gym at this church building. And I loved playing volleyball when I was in like young men's programs and stuff.
Yeah.
But I was tired. I was like, I'm just gonna go home and go out the door, and God kind of hits me, and He's like, you need to go play volleyball. I was like, what? That's the weirdest. Like,
Yeah.
never had that. I'm okay, whatever. So I go in there and play volleyball, and I see my wife in there. Obviously, I didn't know it at the time.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, she's really pretty. Maybe I'll hang out for a little bit. I played baseball my whole life, and I could tell that she probably played softball, because when it was her turn to serve, while I was watching, some guy threw the ball at her way harder than you probably should ever throw a ball at a woman. Hope maybe he knew that she could catch it just fine. She handled it like a boss and was like, didn't even flinch. And so something about that, I was like, she must play softball or something. So I was like, all right, let's see what's going on here. But what was funny is, a couple of days before that, I had told my mother, I was like, I'm done dating. I'm done seeking relationship stuff for a minute, because I had signed up to go do door-to-door sales for pest control in another state for the summer. And this was in February. So I was like, I don't want to start something and just say peace out for 4 months. So I'm going in there. I was like, I want to be here because she's super pretty, but I also don't want to talk to her to like start but apparently that was reciprocated, because she comes over and was just flirting hardcore with me, and like kicking my foot, asking me all these questions. And I'm like, no, I'm staying strong. But she's like, give me your number. I want to go out. And I was like, all right, fine.
Wow.
So she pushed it pretty good.
Yeah, I love it.
I was like, I want to really bad, but I'm like, I committed. I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, whatever. All right. And yes, we went on a first date, and it was awesome. And then, just like every day after that, outside of work and stuff, we're hanging out, spending tons of time together. And we ended up getting married 6 weeks after we met.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's amazing.
Fast.
And what's her name?
Her name is Lauren.
Lauren. Okay. So you and Lauren.
Weston Brandon.
How did
her
you decide?
Picture, I don't know if you can see. Right
oh
there.
Yeah, it's
blurry,
a little bit blurry, but
that's
I can
her.
see. Okay.
Yep. That's her. And then I don't know if you can tell, that's her organ donation badge, her gift of life medal.
Okay. Yeah,
there. So then that's a picture of me, my missionary plaque, and then over here is my second wife. Now that's when she shared a mission, pictures of her.
Oh,
so
cool.
I know you can't see the details, but that's all.
Yeah.
This is the background to
right.
meeting series.
So
family.
Okay, you meet Lauren, you go on some dates, and how do you decide to get married so fast? Like 6 weeks.
That was yeah. So, I mean, that wasn't the plan, really.
Yeah.
But I had proposed to her first, because both of us, I think we're in a mindset where like we don't want to be playing any games and do like messing around, and like we had goals, like we want to move forward with life. We have big goals, big plans. So we had like, I don't remember when it was, like the couple of dates in, we're like, all right, we both like this feels really good to both of us, and we want to see where this is going. And obviously if it keeps going the way that it's going, then it's going to lead to that. So how about we just have the whole, like, get all of the secrets, all of the
Yeah.
skeletons out of, like, all the stuff that we don't ever want to hear get public,
Yeah.
and just get everything out there so there's never
That's so
possibility
great.
for any kind of surprises to show up. So, that's a kind of a rough conversation to have, because you're like,
Yeah.
I don't feel lovable if they know these things about
Right.
me, or,
Uh-huh.
and so you share that and you're both like, well, neither of us are running away. So,
So
I
okay.
mean,
Yeah.
as long as one of us doesn't have some mental, like, we're not
Yeah.
schizophrenic and don't know about it or something like that,
Yeah.
then we'll be okay. And so we decided then, after that conversation, like, all right, we're going to get married then, unless something really, really weird happens.
Yeah.
And, we'd met each other's families and had a good time. So
And how
I
old
ended
were
up
you?
proposing to her. I was
I was just trying to get a picture of like.
21.
Okay, you guys were really young.
Time.
Yeah.
I was 21 and she was 23.
Okay.
And so I had decided I was going to propose to her. I proposed to her maybe 3 weeks after that.
Oh my goodness.
And
I love it.
it was a it was a fun little romantic thing. It kind of planned out. But we were thinking, like, well, I'm going out for summer sales and doing this. So we were thinking, like, well, maybe I'll do that and we'll get married when I come back,
Yeah.
And she's like, well, she didn't really like that plan, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But she didn't tell me that. So she starts talking, and we had already planned this trip to Vegas with some other members of my family. There was a
Mm-hmm.
firearms training place down there. We had scheduled, we're all going to go as a
Oh.
family and go take like this self-defense
Huh.
class down there, And so already planning to go down there, and I meet up with my fiance at this time
Yeah.
for dinner, and she kind of re-proposes back to me, and she's like, will you marry me when we're down there in Vegas?
Wow.
What? So I was like, hold on, I gotta like think about this for a second. I couldn't come up with a good reason why not to, so we ended up making plan. We didn't tell anybody. Didn't tell any of my family, except like my parents and her parents were in on it, and they knew about it, and they were going to come. We just did it at the Clark County Courthouse there in Vegas. And what was funny is, while we were down there, my uncle at this thing, he knows we're engaged. He's like, you guys should do it while you're here. It'll be awesome. Like get married. And we're like, no, we're not going to do
Yeah.
it. And he's like, tell you what, if you guys do it, then I'll buy your wife a gun. I was like, okay.
Okay.
But no,
sure.
no, we're not going to do it. He's like trying to bribe us into doing it with these things. So we end up doing it on April Fool's Day, April 1st.
Oh my goodness.
And the only wedding announcement we did was we took a picture of us holding the marriage certificate with wedding rings on in front of the Clark County Courthouse in Vegas, and then just posted a picture with, I think she did a Snapchat filter that said "fooled" on it. So that's all we did. We just posted that.
So they thought it was like April Fool's joke, probably. People did.
Yeah, so some people thought it was an April Fool's joke. Some people thought it was real. And so we had, for a couple months after that, people would text us or call us like, are you actually married? Like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we are. So that was that story kind of embodies how our relationship was. She was a very spontaneous.
Sounds fun.
Let's just have a ton of fun kind of person.
What made you fall in love with her? What characteristics? The spontaneity, was that part of it?
Yeah, that was one of them. And she was almost to a fault, like so affectionate, like very outward, wear it on her sleeve kind of a person, which I hadn't, experienced anything like that in my life. So it was a whole other experience that someone was that outgoing and that forward to show me that they love me,
Yeah.
That was very refreshing, I guess,
Yeah. So you get married in Vegas, you come home, and then what? What's your life like?
So yeah, then we went out and I did door-to-door sales for a summer, and she was a pharmacy technician at a hospital, and she had a 7-on, 7-off schedule. So she would work her 7 on, and then she'd drive out there and she'd be with me for a couple of days and then drive back for work. And that was emotionally very, very difficult for me to handle, being out there working that hard of a job, missing someone that I love very much, and being in another state.
Yeah.
And thinking back, I almost wish that I wouldn't have met her until after, because of how hard it made that experience. But it also, made me have to work through some things, and made me, I became very successful at it. I became the number 2 rookie in the company while I was out there.
Wow.
Eventually, not at first. I really sucked at first. I ended up crying on the curb, wanting to go home, But then after that, I was like, okay, yeah, that dynamic, I don't like that being married. So I'm going to shift.
Yeah.
I stayed in
Yeah.
sales and got a different job that ended up gave us the option to move to Texas, actually.
Oh, okay.
So I took a job doing software sales for mechanical engineering. I sold CAD software and things.
Okay.
And we ended up in Texas. We found a house that we really liked. We were renting it, and we're like, I was making good money. She got a good pharmacy technician job while we were down there. We're like, I think we're ready to start a family. So that's what we decided to try to do, you know. And it took a couple of tries, a couple of really early miscarriages, which isn't uncommon when you first start. And then one stuck, and that was my son. And at 25 weeks, she was hospitalized with an incompetent cervix.
Oh,
which,
okay.
for anybody that hasn't heard that, when I heard that, I was like, that's a weird way to describe
I
that.
haven't really heard it.
But it is actually a medical thing. Turns out, basically, she dilated but didn't go into labor.
Whoa.
So,
wow.
she was up to
That's
an 8 or a
early.
9 or something like that, but
At
no contractions,
25,
no other
wow.
signs of labor. And so they just called it incompetent cervix. She lost the plug and couldn't hold the baby in anymore. So they put her on bed rest at the hospital and say, you're going to be on bed rest until the baby comes. Could be tomorrow, could be full term, which, 40 minus 25, that's still a long time.
Yes.
That's like 3 months. So we kind of had to come to terms that she might be on bed rest with a bedpan for however much longer for this pregnancy, But they're like, we're going to give you some steroids through an IV that are meant to kick the baby's lungs into gear in the event he does come early. Hopefully it'll help him be a little bit more prepared. And she held him in for another week. So he was born at 26 weeks. It was an emergency C-section because he was starting to come out breech.
Wow.
But the steroids worked. They got his lungs into gear just enough that he didn't need a breathing tube. He just needed a little CPAP on his nose. And they're like, well, he doesn't have any major health issues miraculously. We don't see anything inherently, concerning. So we're just going to keep him here until he can hold his own temperature, he can hold his own oxygen, and he can eat everything on his own and doesn't need a little feeding tube in his mouth or something like that to get the rest of his nutrients. So that's all we were having to wait for.
And what's his name?
His name's Vance.
Vance. That's very cute. I like that. So then were you discharged?
Yeah. And then she was in the hospital for like another day after that. She got stitched up and made sure everything was okay. And then she got to come home. And Vance stayed up in the NICU. And he was in the NICU for a total of about 2.5 months after that before he was allowed to come home. But yeah, then she was discharged after that. And I got another 2 weeks with her at home before she passed. What happened when she passed was, after the surgery, they put these leg massagers on her calves, and that's not uncommon, especially for someone going through a C-section, because both pregnancy and then also surgery in general just makes you a little bit more prone to having blood clots. Right. So they put these massagers on your leg because they say that's usually where they start if they do happen. Mm-hmm. And that is what ended up happening. She had a pulmonary embolism and passed away at home. And they found the scar tissue. It did start in one of her deep leg veins and ended up, goes back to the heart, and then through the heart pumps it out and it gets stuck in the lungs. So that's what ended up happening. And it was about 2 weeks after my son was born at home. I had permission to work from home because it was much closer to the hospital than where my office was. So we were staying there for a minute, and she had had some anxiety issues even before she was pregnant. So she had some medication for that. And then, of course, with everything going on, that's a super stressful experience, right? So she thought at the time that she was just having a panic attack, and she called me into the living room and asked me to just come help her calm down because she was having a hard time catching her breath. Unfortunately, she never did catch her breath, and I just held her in my arms as she lost all of her oxygen. And I ended up having to do CPR on her there in my home. And EMTs showed up. They were actually pretty fast. They showed up maybe 2 or 3 minutes because the fire station where they were at was a couple blocks away. So they got there pretty fast. But it still was too late. They ended up doing CPR on her while they were driving to the hospital. And after they got to the ER for a total of, I think, a little over 30 minutes, they were having to do CPR on her. And before they finally got a shallow pulse back, with all the crazy drugs that they give you to start the heart and all that. And But at that point, you know, it was kind of, if by some miracle she happens to wake up, it's not going to be the same,
Right.
you know,
Wow.
with how much is going on.
So you were in
But I had a couple really, really powerful experiences, even in those moments, that were anchors for my faith to get through that.
Yeah, we'd love to hear those if you want to share.
Yeah,
Like, what are the things
it's
that
actually an
God gave
answer to
you?
one of your questions when you said if
Yeah.
there was a verse or a song or
Yeah.
something like that, right? Um, I have not around here. So in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we generally stick to the King James version of the Bible, but we also use something called the Book of Mormon, kind of hand in hand with that. And like I said, I had served a mission, and I was very, very strong Christian faith, right? I believed in God, I believed in Jesus Christ, and I knew that, you know, he had died for me. But in this moment, you know, all that was called into question, the whole afterlife thing, like all that. I was like, I need to know.
Yeah.
You know, like this. If I need you to talk to me at any point in my life, today's the day.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh-huh.
So I didn't grab like my Bible or anything and take it with me to the hospital. I just had my phone. So I have an app on my phone.
Right.
And I remember there in the ER, there's this separate waiting room for family of people that are currently in the ICU or something. And so I was in there. My mother and father-in-law were actually down there with me, and they were in the hospital with me at the time. And a social worker had been coming to tell us, you know, give us updates. And when they got her pulse back, they took her parents out of the room to go into where she was at, and I was left there in the waiting room for a minute. So I took that opportunity to kneel down and have an unpleasant conversation with God. I was rather upset, right? And at any other time in my life where God had talked to me, it had either been through music or through the Word in some way.
Yep.
So I was like, well, music doesn't really seem great right now, so I'm gonna pull up my app on my phone where I have my scriptures at. You know, I'm just gonna start like, I don't care if it's Old Testament, New Testament, book, like whatever it is. I'm just gonna start tapping and see what shows up.
I've done that.
And what it ended up going. And so I prayed and I told him, I was like, you need to tell me something. I don't know what's going on, but I'm freaking out here. And so I close my eyes and I start tapping, and then I tap a bunch of times, and I open my eyes and I look, and it's actually a scripture. It opened up to a particular chapter in the Book of Mormon. It's called Alma chapter 40. And the very first verse in that chapter, the first one that I look at, it reads this: Now, my son, here is somewhat more I would say unto thee, for I perceive that thy mind is worried concerning the resurrection of the dead. And so when I read that, it was like, hit me like a semi-truck. You know, I could feel God like in the room talking to me. I was like, yeah, that's exactly what my mind is worried about right now, you know? And then just going on through the rest of that chapter and kind of talking about, you know, afterlife and the resurrection and things like that. And basically just driving home what I already knew, but just reminding me that what I had spent my life believing and what I'd spent 2 years teaching people about was actually true, and that I could lean on it. And it was also kind of, I guess, non-verbally saying that she wasn't going to make it. You know, it was kind of also the message that I got in that moment, that she's not going to make it, but this is part of the plan, even though you don't like it.
Yeah.
And I'm here, you know, and you can lean on this, kind of a thing. So that experience, you know, through the months later, as you're just in that pit of misery trying to figure out what the hell to do with your life, you know, that experience, when I felt like God wasn't there, I had to keep going back to that experience that I had. And, you know, probably some other ones even before that in earlier times of my life that were, you know, my anchor points.
So you're in the waiting room, and you pretty much know she's not going to make it. What happens next?
They let us come into her room in the ICU, and we basically just kind of sat there and waited for a miracle. They kept, you know, watching her vital signs and, you know, seeing if anything would come. They, you know, kept checking her pupils, see if they could get any reaction at all. And all signs were showing probable brain death. You know, nothing was happening, but she had a pulse. So like, well, we'll keep her on this for however much longer. And eventually later that evening, actually a couple of leaders of our church congregation had showed up, and this was miracle number one that happened. There's been plenty for sure, but the first one was apparently there was a gentleman in a congregation that was neighboring to us in a closer area
Mm-hmm.
that had recently had a kidney failure and needed a kidney and was on a waiting list and needed one pretty quick. So with this coming out, they come to console us and talk to us about that, but then also like, if she doesn't, are you willing to facilitate a direct transfer? Because
Wow.
you have the authority to do that. Being her husband, you can say where to go. You have, priority over that. So I says, yeah, it doesn't look like she's going to make it. So I'll whatever papers I need to sign to facilitate a direct thing for this guy, go
Wow.
ahead and do it. Obviously, they're like, well, it has to be a match. All of these things
Yeah.
have to be just perfect for it to work. But if it does, then yeah, I'll go ahead and do it. And lo and behold, it all did. It was all
Wow.
perfect. It was an exact match. It's
What?
exactly what he
Wow.
needed. And so he ended up getting one of her kidneys the next morning within, a few hours. And I've called him and talked to him.
I was gonna say, have you ever
We
talked
know
to him
each other, and
before?
he's,
Wow.
yep, he's great. His family, his wife and his daughter actually came to the memorial service that we had for her a few days later,
Mm.
and met me and talked to the family, and as much as I can say sorry and thank you at the same time. It's kind
Right.
of a weird
Yeah.
conversation, but
Yeah.
yeah, they're great people, and
Yeah.
I had his permission to share their
Yeah.
side of the
That's
story anytime it's relevant.
beautiful. So, did eventually they have to take her off life support, or what? How did?
Yeah, yeah. Later that night, they're basically like, you can. There's no signs of
Mm.
life anymore, other than this very weak pulse. But with how much is pumping through her veins with all the drugs we give her, her heart rate should be going 250 beats a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going barely 60. And so we eventually had to call it,
Mm.
and they wheel her down to the room where they're going to do the operating room where they're going to harvest the organs. And myself and her parents were the last ones to see her and say goodbye. And I was the final one to say, go ahead and pull it. And then
So
gave her a
hard.
kiss on the forehead and said goodbye and had to walk out of the room. And that was the last time, that I ever saw her with a heartbeat.
And at this time, was your son still in the NICU?
Yeah. Yep. So this had been 2 weeks that he'd been in there, and he was in the NICU for a total of 2.5 months.
Okay.
So after that, he was in the NICU for another 2 months after his mom passed.
Wow. And were you? I'm not super familiar with NICU, but I'm guessing you get to go up and visit him, and So was
Yeah.
he at the same hospital as her at that time?
No, it was a different one. The hospital they took her to was a little bit closer, but
Mm-hmm.
the NICU he was at is one of the top NICUs in the entire country. And that's also where her OB was, where she worked at and did deliveries and stuff. So it was about 45 minutes away. The hospital we were at, where they took my wife, was about 15 minutes away. Um, but yeah, after we called that and I signed the papers and said goodbye, then my parents were actually already planning on. They were already on a plane
Mm.
coming to us to come visit when all
Right.
this happened.
Wow.
I actually called them and told them, "Hey, we're headed to the hospital with Lauren. I don't know what's going on." As they were boarding the plane to fly down
Oh,
to Texas, and so they showed up, and so then I had both my parents and
that's
my
so good.
my in-laws there with me. So my parents just grabbed me, and we went up to the other hospital where my son was at. You know, official time of death was about 2 o'clock in the morning. So
Mm.
then after that, we just went up to the hospital, and I went and spent another 3 or 4 hours, with my boy, and then
Mm-hmm.
went home just before the sun was coming up, that morning, and
Yeah.
slept for I don't know how long,
Right.
you know.
And so obviously this is all total shock out of nowhere. What
hmm
what did it feel like those first few days? Like where were you mentally, emotionally, all of that?
Um, well, I mean, when everything's going on, obviously you're having moments of panic, but then moments of numb, like,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
kind of like you're not even sure how to
Right.
process what's even happening. And I think the moment that I had the crash where it finally all sat and you have your complete meltdown come apart where it feels like your body's going to fall apart was after coming home from the other hospital where I'd been with my son for a few hours. My mother and my father finally drove me back to my house. Pulling back up to my house and walking in my home and seeing where everything had happened.
Yes.
But she's no longer there. That was like the final moment that I had a terrible come apart there. And I've often thought more recently that, my mother and my father were there listening to what I was doing, how bad I was coming apart, and they just had to sit there and like there's nothing they could do about it. So I often think of how hard that must have been for them. But then in the months, well, I guess in the weeks following that, it was it just becomes distraction. Distract yourself from the feelings, distract yourself from the loneliness. So I went through a bunch of retail therapy. I just bought all the things that I wanted that I hadn't bought, and I would go up and see my son for a bit. When very early in the process, I was really, I kind of hated myself because, and since now that I coach and speak, I've talked to many other new dads and also plenty of widows and widowers that I found that this isn't uncommon. But at the time, I felt like I was the only person who experienced this, where I didn't feel a relationship with my baby, with my son. I didn't feel much of a connection with him or anything because, my wife had been having these experiences with him because he was inside of her. They had a relationship there, and I saw a picture on the sonogram and I heard a heartbeat, but other than that, I was just getting like information relayed to me through my wife. So I'm just, believing the stories that she tells me. So when I lose her, and she's like my connection to him, and now it's this stranger that has replaced her. So I felt really bad about this, but I had a little bit of resentment towards him there for like a week or two, and I didn't realize that I had until kind of at the end when I realized that those feelings were happening. But also spending a lot of intentional time holding him and built that relationship with him very quickly, totally fell in love with the kid, after a few days, and, he was mine and has been ever since. He's my son. And in talking to, other, even new dads that don't have anything this crazy happen, sometimes when their child's born and, they'll have like, holy crap, I'm a father. But I've talked to some new dads, like when my daughter or my son was first born, I felt like there was something broken in me because I'm like not like gushing tears of joy of love for this child that I've not had any experience with, other than a little bit. And I found that that's not super uncommon. But then the relationship builds pretty quickly as you start to have, you start to build a relationship with your child, and because it's a piece of you, that happens super, super quick. So like I said, since then I learned that I wasn't abnormal. There was nothing wrong with me. And I had to have my dad tell me that, to kind of speak some sense into me while I'm thinking that I'm just this terrible person, But then after that, it's just bouncing between extreme loneliness and numbness, and then just doing things to distract yourself from it. So my in-laws stayed with me for quite a while. My brother-in-law played lots of video games with my brother-in-law. Try to do fun things, go ride motorcycles, go do this, go do that. Try to, have a little bit of joy in life, even though we're dealing with this crazy experience. That's kind of what it was. It was bouncing between distractions and numb loneliness for a long time.
Right. And how old were you? Because you're still pretty young,
I was 23 when this all happened.
Oh my goodness. You're the youngest widow or widower that I've ever met. Like the youngest when this happened. Like that is... So you're 23 years old, you're a new widower and a new dad. Like those are huge things, like all at once. Well, most of your friends are probably, at your age just playing video games. They don't have any other responsibilities,
Right. Yeah. Most of my high school buddies, a lot of my high school buddies were also returned missionaries. We all went to church together, and some of them were freshly married, but
nobody's going through what you are.
Very few of them were fathers, and no, nobody.
So that
was another thing that made it difficult was, I'm like, I'm 23 and I'm trying to find who else has ever experienced this.
Right.
and I'm finding like one or two
Barely.
stories of somebody
Yeah.
across the country that might have been 10
Right.
years ago, you know?
Exactly.
So that didn't help the loneliness feeling for sure.
Right.
All the widows and widowers supports I found were
Way
mostly
older than
for
you.
widows, for women,
Yeah.
and so I felt a little alienated from that because women are a lot more, let's help each other, let's talk about it
Yes.
kind of thing, just naturally. Men
Mm-hmm.
aren't so much
And you're a young man,
naturally.
like super young
And I'm
compared to
young,
these
so the
widows.
widowers that I was finding were much older men that I didn't
Yeah.
relate to very well. So it was a very lonely time for sure.
Right. Because we still consider people are like young widows in their 40s. Like I'm in my 40s, that's considered young widow, but you're like in your
Yeah,
20s, and you
yeah.
became widowed. I'm sure that was super hard. So did you go back to work? Like is someone help with the baby? Like how did it all work? Like when life is like kind of settling down, your son's coming home from the NICU, your wife has passed away. Like what is life like then?
So like I said, I was living in Texas at the time,
Oh, that's right.
and
Texas. Okay.
so I wasn't anywhere near any of my family. My
Right.
in-laws were in the area at the time.
Mm.
They were kind of living a nomad life. They were living in this big RV and traveling around. So they just happened to be. Luckily, they were in the area when it all happened. So they
That's
stayed
so
there for
good.
a long time, which was good that
Mm-hmm.
they had the flexibility to move around like that. But all of my family and friends and everybody else was mostly all back in Utah. So I knew I was like, I got to go back to where the people that want to support me are better able to support me.
Yeah.
So I packed up all my stuff. My son was discharged, like I said, 2.5 months later. So he was born end of March and he was discharged mid-June. And so I moved back home about 3 weeks later on the 4th of July. I packed up all my
Oh.
stuff and moved back to Utah and moved back into my parents'
Mm.
basement, the bedroom
Yeah.
that I was in when I graduated high school,
Right. Well, you
and
needed help.
square one again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my mother-in-law and my mother took care of my son quite a bit.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
not only am I not naturally wired just by my biology to be a nurturing mother, I was even more broken at the time, so even less
Yeah.
capable of doing that. And I did my best, but there was a lot of people that had to support us, and our neighborhood came together, and they were bringing us meals, they were
Good.
coming over and visiting, they were supporting us and making sure that we had space to deal with that, so that was very, very helpful. But then as I moved back into my basement bedroom and I'm sitting there like square one, my whole life just got completely blown apart, start over, except now I have this new responsibility, which is a 23-year-old. I honestly was still a kind of a kid, I was doing most
Yeah.
things for fun. I was married and I had a job, but it was all fun. I
Right.
had lots of freedom. Um, but now that I had this little baby to take care of, I felt like all of my freedom was ripped away, and I now had to ask permission from my mother to go out again.
Right.
Because she would
So
have to
hard.
watch my kid.
Yeah.
So it's like going back to the
Mm-hmm.
teenage routine again was also part of kind of a mentally heavy thing for me to
Yeah, I'm
deal with, and I
sure.
didn't like. But I knew for I had the biggest thing that I knew that I had to do is I had to provide for my son. So I knew I was going to have to go back to
Yeah.
work. I was going to have to, I had to grow up real fast.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, I know, like I said, because of I'm just not a nurturing mother by my wife. I can do the best that I can. I can do an okay job, but there's something different about a woman that loves her baby.
Right.
There's something different in their wiring that's made for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew I was like, if I am going to provide for my son the best life that I can possibly give him, I need to at least be open to another relationship, even though I don't feel like going and searching one out.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
not what I want to do. But I guess I was like, I have to not be selfish and at least leave that door open should God decide to put
Right.
something in there. Right. So what I ended up doing was I downloaded a dating app and I
Mm-hmm.
just put pictures of me and my son, and as much as the character limit would allow, like, hey, here's
Right.
everything, where we're at, what's going on. And so I ended up swiping through all these people, and I just said no to every single one of them.
Yeah.
And after I got through and got to the end of the list, I realized that I'm just saying no because it's not who I'm looking for. Who I'm looking
Mm-hmm.
for isn't here.
Right.
And so I looked at it. And luckily, there was a premium version that if you paid like $20 a month or something like this, then you wouldn't have to swipe. It would just tell you who swiped on you, and then you could
Oh,
look.
okay. That
So
works.
I was like, "You take my money. I don't even want to
Yeah.
be looking at this." I was like, we'll just see if anybody's just crazy enough to want a piece of this, I guess.
Right.
And so I left it for a few days and then came back and looked at it, and there was like 4 or 5. I'm like, these women are nuts. Why do they want a piece of this? But started, in having a conversation with some of these ladies, and the vast majority of them were, at least through the conversations I was having, came off as some of the most highly emotionally intelligent people I'd ever talked to.
Wow.
And like any of them would have been, from what I could tell from talking to them, any of them
Right.
would have been a steal. They're awesome people. The kinds of questions they were asking me and the stories that we were sharing with each other were really cool. And the woman I ended up marrying, my wife, Kearsley, was the first one I went on a date with.
Oh, I love it.
And so we scheduled a date, and I ended up having to reschedule it. But then once we finally got around to having our first date, I remember I prayed before we went on that, because I still wasn't super happy with God. I was still had some issues with this whole situation. But I don't know who told me this or where I'd heard it earlier in my life, was even if you're angry at God, like, let him know all of the details of your feelings, because he can handle it. Right.
Yep.
Like if you want to scream, go freaking scream at him. He can take and help you through it. So that's what I was doing. My prayers were not super happy prayers for a long time.
Yep.
And before I went on this date with my wife, I with my second wife, I prayed and I was like, whatever you've got her doing over there, obviously it's important, but I'm requesting some PTO real quick, and she needs to come with me on this date, because I don't trust myself to not just like fall over for the first person that shows me affection, because I don't my judgment, who knows? I don't know where my brain's at. So we're going to go do this date thing, and you're going to let her come with me, and she's going to tell me whether she approves or not, And so that's what I prayed, and I went, and we met up at a Texas Roadhouse and had dinner, and the conversations were awesome. We went and did some hatchet throwing, was kind of the in thing at the
fun.
time,
Yes. Yep.
And we did that. And so this is back in this is late 2019. This is like August 2019. And then after that was all we had planned, but we were both having a great time. So we decided, well, let's, keep hanging out a little bit longer. So again, I text my mom, like, can I hang out a little longer? And she's like, yeah, sure, whatever. And so we go and get ice cream, and I had a motorcycle at this time, so I hopped around the back of the motorcycle, and we went and got ice cream, and then talked for a little while longer. And then we decided, okay, we need to, go home and go to bed, kind of a thing. She gets in her car and starts driving away, and I said out loud, I was like, well, babe, what do you think? And when I said that, like, it freaking hit, like, just this big, like, this feeling that I got was so good. And so it was like a confirmation to me. I was like,
so cool.
I don't think it was like you need to marry this person, or like, this is who you're going to marry. Cause I don't think that you definitely shouldn't just go tell somebody like, God told me that we need to get married.
Yeah. It might scare them off a little bit.
But I felt like it was like, hey, if this is reciprocated, if she feels the same way, then this would be I approve of this, this would be good. And so I was like, all right, cool. If it keeps going, kind of the same thing with my first wife, if it keeps going the way that this did, and everything's good, then it'll probably work out. So I felt like I'm probably going to end up marrying this person if nothing else crazy happens. Right. So of course we, for the next few days, we're spending a lot of time together talking about this. And what she didn't tell me at the time was a few days later, she kind of had the same experience between her and God, that this was something good to pursue. So then both of us are thinking marriage, but like totally scared to death of what the other person's going to think, especially given the situation. And the conversation kind of happened by accident. Because my second wife had been married previously and got divorced. It was kind of an abusive relationship. So she was sharing me some of those stories of what was going on. In my head, I'm thinking, I had this amazing relationship with my first wife, and I can't, what I thought in my mind was, I can't wait to show you what a healthy marriage looks like.
Yeah.
But that accidentally started coming out of my mouth.
Oh. She's like,
so I accidentally started to say, I was like, I can't wait. And when I got like halfway through the word wait, I just bit my tongue. I was like, oh geez. And she knew exactly what I was going to say when I started doing that. But I bit my tongue and I just sat there silent. I was like, nope, not going to talk about that.
Right.
And so she's like, so she pried it out of me. She's like, can't wait for what? Like, what are you doing? I'm like, all right, fine. I guess we're having this whole conversation. So right then and there, we had the whole get all the skeletons out of the closet conversation. You know, everything, all the dirty, everything right there in my parents' basement. So a couple hours after that, conversation's all done. We're like, we both still feel pretty good about this. So, I mean, we're not engaged right now, but we're like, I think we've decided we're probably going to do this.
And what are at that point, what are her thoughts about becoming an instant mom too? Was it like, what's the time frame? Is your baby still little at this point?
Yeah. So he was born March and end of March, and this is 1st of August of the same year. So it's like,
okay. So what are her thoughts about that? Like having a pretty much newborn little baby, you know?
She was kind of all for it. You know, of course she had some struggles with, like, she kind of mentally placed herself under my first wife, you know?
Right.
And she'll even tell you, if you ever talked to her, that there was nothing that I ever said or did to suggest that. That was more just in her head of what she was doing. But I kind of joke. In fact, in the preface of the book that I wrote, I said, I don't know whether she fell in love with me or my son first, but it doesn't really matter, you know? But she loved him to death. And she very quickly took over primary caregiver for my son.
Wow.
She decided to quit her job so that she could take care of the baby so that I could try to go back to work.
Wow.
And I ended up not being able to really go back to work to my previous sales position because, you know, even though life was moving forward and, you know, there was this new person in our life that was just, you know, our miracle, our entire family, the biggest miracle was her coming in here.
Yeah. Sounds like
my mind still wasn't in a place that I could handle a whole lot of stress and anxiety very well, you know, without having things start to shut down. So going back to work and getting told that I have a quota for sales.
Too hard.
And no, I couldn't do that at the time. So I ended up having to leave that job, and I'm still great friends with everybody that I worked there. You know, there wasn't any like hard feelings with anything like that. In fact, the people that I worked for, the company is called Go Engineer, they were extremely supportive. There were a bunch of people there that worked there that donated to a GoFundMe. Like probably over half the GoFundMe was from the company that I worked for. People, and you know, they were awesome. They gave me a lot of space. I didn't attempt to go back to work for about 9 months after she passed away.
Yeah.
Was on FMLA leave for a little bit and just basically living off the little bit of Social Security that I was getting from her passing to pay for food stuff, you know.
Right.
But she became kind of an instant mom.
That's awesome. Did you ever have anybody, you know, some people judge? Did anyone say, "Oh, you're dating too quickly"?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What did you do with that? I hate it when people judge. They have no idea.
Yeah. My first wife's parents, and they've given me permission to share this particular detail because they're fairly private people. I want to respect their privacy, but they did say that I could share this on any time I'm talking, was that my father-in-law had lost his first wife also.
Oh, okay.
Very, very young. And he was in his, I can't remember. He might have to correct me on this, but I think it was mid to late 20s when he lost his first wife.
Very similar.
But she had a bunch of medical things from her past, and growing up she wasn't able to have kids, so they didn't have any children. But she passed away, and then he met my mother-in-law, the mother of my first wife, a couple months after that. And they ended up getting married, you know, just a few months after they had met also. So they, you know, they had kind of been through, with the exception of having the child, basically the same thing. You know, so they were very, very supportive in that. But there were other family members and friends that it made them really, really uncomfortable that we were moving with this. And you know, even some members of my second wife's family were, of course, they're like, what are you doing? Why are you getting into this situation with this guy? He just wants a babysitter, you know. And I've since had great relationships with everybody on her family now, and you know, but at the time there for a few months, it was a emotionally volatile time. It was hard for us. because we know the experiences we've had. We know the conversations we've had
Right.
with each other and with God, and so we know, as much as we can what we're doing. But of course, to people on the outside, I learned through that experience that a lot of times when you lose your spouse, the people that loved your spouse, you are the closest thing that they now have to that person. So they kind of
True.
attach their own grief
Mm-hmm.
process to you. So if you're moving forward, not on, I don't think you move on, but you're moving
Exactly.
forward
Forward, yes.
faster than they
Mm-hmm.
feel comfortable moving on themselves or moving forward themselves, then that makes them uncomfortable. That's too much of a
Right.
stretch for them to think about, because they don't want to. You know, they kind of make you this martyr for this person that they lost, and
Yeah.
learning how to handle all of that from some other people was difficult. I don't think I did it very well at first. It was more like a,
It's
what,
hard.
fine, good riddance, screw
Yeah.
all of you,
Yeah.
kind of a thing. And had to, come back and have some reconciliation with some people after the fact. But yeah, I guess I've talked about that with some other because I'm in some Facebook groups for, extremely young widows and stuff,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of stuff like that where you just have to realize that you can't take it personal. They're dealing with their own stuff, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, you're just the closest thing that they have to that. So, when you're not fitting the mold for what they think you should, it's going to make them uncomfortable for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So tell me more about I'm sorry, what's your second wife's name?
Her name is Kirasley.
Kearsley, that's a pretty name. So tell me more about, okay, you're dating pretty seriously right away. What's your path to getting married? How does that all play out?
Yeah, so we started dating August, and then we ended up getting married in March the following
Mm.
year. And we had been wanting to get married a little bit earlier, but there was, like I mentioned, there was some drama with
Yeah.
some family members there for a second, that we decided is like, well, let's push it back just a little bit, and make sure that everybody that we want to be involved can be involved. And so we ended up getting married in March, and we rented a house together very, very quickly. The whole time that we were dating, she was essentially living at my parents' house, like
Mm.
sleeping on the couch, taking
Yeah.
care of this baby,
That's
while I tried to
amazing.
go back to work. And yeah, she's an absolute rock star. And she's a mother of two more kids now, so she's got three now, and she's
Mm-hmm.
still a freaking rock star.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was just it was a weird time. We basically just hung out in my parents' basement for 6 months or 5, however long that was,
Yeah.
you know. And we we had a house lined up, like I said, that we were going to rent once we got married. So the day we got married, we moved into that house, and went from there.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up changing careers. Like I said, I couldn't handle sales anymore, so
Yeah.
uh, she got some different part-time jobs to kind of help fill in some gaps while I was changing careers. I ended up going back to school to go into the trades instead
Mm.
of sales, because at the time I used to be, well, I am again now, because it is who I am. But at that time I was like, I'm no longer a people person. I don't want to talk to anybody. I just want to,
Yeah.
be able to do my thing with my hands and just focus and get paid
Yeah.
for it,
Mm-hmm.
So
So you moved into your house and started your life together. And how soon after that did you guys already know you wanted to have more kids? How did your,
oh yeah, yeah, we both knew that we wanted to have more kids. Just kind of when was the
Yeah.
question. um I don't even remember, like, if she would have to tell you if we decided, like, okay, we're
Right.
gonna try to get pregnant now, or if it just happened.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember. But she ended up getting pregnant with my daughter, and kind of at the same time we got married right when the whole COVID thing started.
Mm-hmm.
March 2020 was like right after, I think, Donald Trump had come out and said, hey, this is a pandemic, everything's shutting down and all this.
Mm-hmm.
And the venue where we wanted to get married was actually the Provo City Center Temple. Great
Mm-hmm.
big, fancy looking building, and a religious building there. And we wanted to get married there. And they had severely restricted already how many people could show up, to like a
Yeah.
maximum of 8. It
Oh
was
my
ridiculous.
goodness.
So
Yes.
we ended up having 6 there. We had my parents, my first wife's parents and my second wife's
that's
parents.
special.
Like all
Wow.
6 of them were there, and that was a cool experience. More like a eternal perspective kind of a thing. All of us are coming in here. Then that was on a Saturday, and then that Sunday they announced, hey, all of these places are now closed.
Well, good thing you did it.
All together. Like nobody can go. So we got in by the skin of our teeth, that we
Right.
could even go to those grounds and have those pictures and stuff. And yeah, then COVID hit, and then life got really crazy, and we decided, you know what, the interest rates right now are crazy. We lived in that house for about another year, and it was when housing interest was in like the 2% or 3%, really low. And I knew, I was like, if we want to buy out, like as soon as the interest rates go up, like housing prices are already going sky high. So both of us felt very strongly, for some reason, we needed to buy a house pretty quick. So we got out of our lease. We moved into a basement apartment with my sister-in-law, my second wife's sister. And we just started house hunting. We had kind of a vision for what we wanted, and we kept that in our mind. And it took us about 9 months to land it, but we eventually got the house, and this is it, where we're at now. And we ended up closing on the house. Some funky things happened with like credit right at the end that bumped our interest rate a little bit up. So for a couple weeks, I was like, got an interest rate that was like a 1% higher or 0.75% higher than what we wanted. But then 3 weeks after that, the interest rates went through the roof.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, it's not bad.
Yeah.
We closed at like a 3, and then they jumped up to 8. I was like, whoa, okay, never mind.
Yeah.
I'm not mad anymore.
Don't complain. Yeah, exactly. So I'm curious about the dynamic with Kearsley and Vance. How old is he now?
He's 6 now.
He's 6. So I'm sure he knows he has his mom in heaven. And then he has,
she's right. Like he sees her all the time.
And this mom, like, how have you guys explained it? Because obviously he was too young to remember anything. What's that like with him? Like, as far as what you guys talk about and stuff?
That's story time. Whenever he wants to know stuff, and we've got all the pictures and videos on our phone. Like there's not a single detail about anything that happened that's any kind of like, we'll wait to tell him this. Like, no, as soon as he wants to, as we talk about it, he knows who she is. Mommy Lauren to all of my kids is just Mommy Lauren.
Oh, I love that.
So they have we have a mommy angel in heaven that,
yes, I love
she's going to
it.
keep you straight. She can see you when we're not here,
So they all know Mommy Lauren.
Yeah. They all know Mommy Lauren. Yeah, the Mommy Lauren is who it is to all 3 of my kids.
I love that.
And her parents, Gigi and Papa, they go out. And in fact, this next weekend they're driving out to see them. They live in another state pretty close to us, but they go out there. My wife will pack up the kids. I usually stay here because I have to work, but she'll pack up the kids and they'll go spend 4 or 5 days with them.
Wow.
Like 3 or 4 times a year. Like
your
probably once a quarter they'll go.
Wife Kearsley goes with Lauren's family.
Yep.
Is that what you're saying? That's an amazing dynamic, because that doesn't happen very often. Like,
yeah, they have my first wife's mom, my OG mother-in-law, has a better relationship.
Hey, that's a good way to say it. I need to say it like that.
I think arguably my second wife, my wife now, has probably a better relationship with her than even I do.
Wow, this is amazing. That's a miracle right there.
All the time. They both feel very, very blessed. And Kirsty's like, I got 2 of the greatest mother-in-laws ever, and as do I. It's just the greatest, like the best in-laws relationships that you could have. Just doubled. It's awesome.
That's amazing. I mean, you probably know from working with widows and widowers that there's so many that when their husband or wife dies, they're kind of cut off. Sometimes the kids are cut off. Like, it's not always a good situation.
Yeah, no, it's not.
I mean, mine was pretty good. That my OG in-laws and his whole family, they were at my second wedding and they were good with that. And it's good, but it's like, that's amazing. Like, to have that kind of dynamic. And I love that. I love that for your kids, for all your kids. Like, how special that your kids, that Lauren's not their mom, but they're spending time with Lauren's family. I mean, it's great. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah, they just have an extra set of grandparents,
Yes, that is so amazing. I love what you guys have built. So kind of, we're skipping all over, but you guys got married and had 2 more kids. So tell us all, like, how old your kids are right now.
Yep. So Vance, he was the tiny little 1 pound, 13 ounce
Oh my
premature
gosh.
baby. He's 6 now, and he's great. He has the attitude of a 6-year-old. He's
Yeah.
bouncing off the walls and everything. He's 6, and then my daughter Rowan,
Oh, cute name.
we'll just say she's 4, because by the time this episode
Yeah.
comes out, she'll be 4. And then my youngest is Ripken, and he's 18 months.
Ripken. I love all of those names. They're like very unique. That's so cute. I love that. So what is life like now? I mean, it's busy with 3 little ones. Like, what do you do? I know, you've got your job and all the things. And then like, tell us about what else you do. Just tell us what life is like now, currently in 2025.
Yeah. So like I said, I had changed careers, so I've been in that new career field for not quite 5 years now. Towards I think Labor Day or something will be my 5-year anniversary doing this, but I do commercial kitchen equipment service now, and I work for the distributor of the company that makes most everybody's ice cream machines.
That's so cool.
Like I mentioned before we went on recording, including the McDonald's ice cream machine. So you could do a whole other podcast episode on that.
Yes, we could learn all about that.
But yeah, so that's what I do. I go around and I fix stuff for a living, and I train new guys when they come in. And now, 6 months ago, this book
tell us about
was not even an idea in my mind. So this is the book that I just wrote, and you see it's not for resale, so it's
and for
not out yet. It'll be June 5th is the launch day.
Okay, so a lot of people can't see you because they're just listening. Can you tell us what it's called?
Yeah. So it's called The Overhaul: Fixing Your Mindset and Driving Success. And what the book is the preface is kind of the story that we've just been talking about, kind of everything that happened, just obviously super Cliff Notes version. And then what I dive into with the rest of the book, a whole other 12 chapters, is what I learned after that, specifically as it relates to how you go through life getting what you want, right? How do you force success into your life the way that you want it to look? Because I could have just stayed there, and a lot of what I talk about in the book was actually fleshed out in training some of the new guys that we had hired at both this job, but then also things that I'd talk about with people that I was helping train in my previous profession in sales. And a lot of what I realized in helping some of these guys was that while I was trying to teach like technical knowledge, in my field, electrical is a huge thing. So we're always talking about electrical things and electrical theory. And a lot of times the troubleshooting skills couldn't land very well unless there was some character development that happened first.
True. Yeah.
That, and I could see, I don't, not any type of clairvoyant kind of thing, but like you can look, I found that I could look at some of these guys that were just barely coming into the field. And after they rode with me for a while and I saw their behavior and saw kind of how they thought about themselves and these things, that I could start to pick up and make pretty accurate assumptions about what their childhood was like. And, as an adolescent, whether, relationships with other people. Yeah. And so I started having these conversations with some of these guys like, hey, we're driving 3 hours to a job. So we have a lot of time to talk. I'm like, hey, I'm going to make some assumptions about your upbringing, and I want you to tell me if I'm right or not.
Wow.
And like, I assume that your relationship with your dad was something like this, or your relationship with your mom was something like this, or, this, that, and the other. And they kind of look at me like, how the freak do you, how do you know that? I'm like, you wear it, dude. You wear it on your face. You wear it in how you act. They're like, what do you mean? So then I had to start like, well, how do I communicate what I'm seeing, in these people? And so a lot of that ended up being in the book of what I learned from training these guys. And then some other things that I learned on how to basically how I visualized where I am now in a way that made it happen, a pretty popular book that some people that I know that were super into was called The Secret by Rhonda.
Yeah, I remember that years ago. Yeah.
And that was a big thing for a long time. And I had read some of that and I was like, this is cool, but there was a lot of more like, I guess, new ageism and kind of not anything particularly spiritual about it. So I was like, I feel like there's kind of something there, but it was missing a lot.
Yeah.
And then my mother actually gave me a book by a lady named Leslie Householder and called The Jackrabbit Factor. It's a 3-series book it's a 3-book series. End up reading that, and I was like, ooh, this is a lot like this, but this feels like it has a lot of the missing piece of what I was looking for, that about my relationship with God and how that plays into it. And so when I was reading some of those, I decided like, let's try to put some of this in. A lot of what, she learned is from Bob Proctor and the Proctor Gallagher Institute about like law of vibration and law of transmutation, kind of some of these things. And so I was like, well, how do let's just try some of this and see if it works. So the house that we have now was actually my experiment to see if it worked.
Oh yeah.
And it did. And because when we got this house, there were 16 other offers on the house, and our offer was nowhere near the highest one.
Wow.
But the people that sold the house felt like for some reason we were the ones that needed the house. And I couldn't explain why, but anytime they were about to accept a different offer, they just like, that doesn't feel right. But then when they went to look at ours, they're like, that's who needs it. And so, and I tried experiments with that over and over. And with what I do now with going around speaking and writing the book, I kind of did the same thing where you look at your life ahead. You're like, what do I want? And also, check it with God and pray about it and make sure you're on the same page about this.
Yeah.
And, but I've also found that if your version of success for your life, if you pursuing that is also going to help God lift up other of his children in, good, healthy ways, then he's probably going to be all for it.
Exactly.
You know? Mm-hmm. So I would look out and like, what do I want? Like this house, exactly what do I want? And like really put myself in there. Like, this is what it looks like. This is what it feels like. I could like paint the picture in extreme detail with words if I had to, write it down, and then intentionally feel gratitude for it as if I've already made it, and just hold that in my mind all the time. And then those things start coming as long as I'm also moving towards it. And I realized through doing this a few times that if I have a goal like this, that seems, X amount away, I guess, really, I only have to go about halfway. Because if I do it right, I start to bring the other things that I need to me. I start to invite those things. Jim Rohn was a pretty well-known, popular motivational speaker years ago.
Yep.
And one of his quote that I really like of his was and I might be butchering this, but it was paraphrased like this: was, you don't chase success, you attract it, and you attract it by becoming attractive to success, right? To what you want. And so I started studying more on this. And like I said, in my profession, we deal a lot with electricity and having to understand thermodynamics and how heat energy transfers and stuff, dealing with refrigeration and air conditioning. That's all that is how do you get energy from one place and how do you kick it over here? And so as I started digging into that more, I realized I was like, this is kind of how the whole world works. Like, heat energy is transferred through vibration of molecules, and we learned that in school. And all of these different, things are transferred through information is transferred through vibration. When we're learning about how electricity moves, it's all vibration and movement of electrons and all these kind of things. So all of these things, I'm like, there's something else here. So like I said, that's when I started. I was like, let's try this. Let's put this out there, see how this goes. And the most magnificent things started happening, bringing these things in. So I was like, wow, this is cool. So then I started writing down, like, this is my perspective on it and how I learned how to utilize this in the book, along with, all these other things that I talk about in the book. So if you're going to read the book, what you'll find is I split the book into 3 sections. I call it ignition, the shift, and launch. Like, if you're going to really launch your life into wherever you want to go, this is kind of the 3 sections you need to take. And ignition is kind of just the foundation, where I'm talking about, like, scientifically, this is just kind of how the world works with on the molecular, like all these kind of things, and electricity, and some metaphors we can use for ourselves, and just mental health kind of things. And then I go to the shift, and in the shift, I broke down basically an acronym that I use to describe what committed movement looks like. And if I had to take the entire book, like my main message, if I get on a stage and I tell them, like, if you take nothing else from this than this one phrase that I want you to know, it's that clarity comes through committed movement. So if you're asking yourself the question, what do I do now? Or, any version of whatever that question is, like, what job do I go into? Who do I marry? All this kind of thing. Clarity comes through committed movement. And I'm like, okay, well, what is committed movement? What was my committed movement? And I had to take a lot of time to break down like all of these things that are in my mind that I'm really passionate about. How do I get that across in a simple to understand way?
Yeah.
So I came up with the acronym of DRIVE, and that's discover, resolve, invest, visualize, and elevate. And they're not necessarily a step-by-step thing, even though you kind of have to do them initially one at a time, but then they all kind of support each other. Like discover everything, like who you are and what you want, and discovering the things inside of yourself that are holding you back from what you want, and a lot of times you probably need some professional help to discover some things deep enough to resolve some of those. That's the next one. But Simon Sinek is famous for his talks on find your why.
Yeah.
Right. Like find your why. Why are you here? Why are you doing what you're doing? And attach to that for your motivation. And for a long time, that didn't really resonate with me, because I was like, my why is I'm a dad, I'm a father.
Yeah.
Like that's easy for me. But then as I really sat down and thought about it, I'm like, well, why, if I'm discovering my why, I'm really discovering the answer to the question, what hails you? Like if why is another acronym all by itself, then I talk about it means what hails you, like what's calling to you. If there's a trumpet way off in the distance, metaphorically speaking, of course, that's calling to you to come do something for some particular reason, that's different for everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
Could just be you want to be a stay-at-home mom. You want to be you have this particular career field that's calling to you. Whatever that is, you got to have a general idea where that trumpet's sounding from so that you can start attacking it. And that's what you'll figure out a better idea of what it actually is once you start moving towards it. And then you have to resolve some things within yourself that hold you back, resolve some things with other people, and then just develop resolve to keep going even though it's hard, right?
Yeah.
And then once you've done that enough, you start to have enough clarity to discover where you need to invest in yourself.
That's good.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm going to invest in myself to make some big changes that are either going to help me and my family a lot more or help a lot of other people.
Yeah.
And oftentimes both.
Yeah.
Right? Like if I can help a lot of other people in a way that also ends up helping my family, whether financially or emotionally or, whatever, I just gave a high school graduation commencement speech last night, and I shared a story about cliff jumping when I went cliff jumping, and I hesitated right at the edge of this thing, and I kind of half fell off and ended up breaking my kneecap. This was years and years and years ago, because I hit a rock under the water. And so I got a big old scar on my knee from that. And the biggest advice, if you ever go cliff jumping, they say jump far.
Yeah.
Right? Like jump out as far as you can so you clear any rocks that are under the water. So I use that as a metaphor for these kids graduating high school. It's like, you're now at the edge of your cliff. You need to jump far. And that's really what investing in yourself is. Like, if you know kind of which direction you need to go, jump as far as you can that way. And you'll start to figure it out.
I love it.
The visualize part is just how you make sure that as you're jumping far and as you're investing in yourself, the rest of what is outside of your control can start to come to you to support that, right? And actually make it real. And then the E is just the catalyst for all of it, making it all work. Like I said, if your plan also helps God's plan, then he's going to be all for it. And that's just elevate other people along the way. Try to help bring as much good into the world as you can through your own goals. And I found that if I'm doing that and I'm actually doing it for the people, not selfishly, like grudgingly, I have to help these people if I'm going to be successful. No, like elevate other people along the way, and it'll change everything. And then in the book, I dive into some other areas of elevate, like elevate your thoughts, elevate your faith, elevate your environment. Like if you live and work in a place that is just a mess all the time, then your mind's going to be a mess all the time. It's just your environment is often just an outward reflection of what's in here, So there's a whole bunch, that's why it's a book, because I'm like, I could never explain everything.
So your story is like a little bit in the beginning, and then it's the things you just talked about, or is your story like?
Yeah. So the book, The Overhaul: Fixing Your Mindset and Driving Success, is much less of my story, then this is what I learned and how
Yeah.
I forced success into my life after everything crashed.
Right.
You
That's
know,
awesome.
so the preface is like, hey, here's what happened. Set the context for where I'm coming from with this. And then this is what I do now. And what I do now compared to that is like on a completely other planet.
Yeah.
You know, so like, how did I get from there to here?
Yeah.
You know, and that's what the book is how I got from there to here.
I love it. It sounds like a really great book for helping anyone figure out their purpose, which is something I talk about in my book, Discover Your Purpose, like figuring that out. Because after we're widowed, a lot of times we're lost. We're trying to figure out, what do I do now? But you have a broad audience because this is for anybody who wants to move forward. I'm like thinking about my almost 21-year-old son, like needs to read this and get some direction in his life and figure it out. And
I do write it with the perspective that I'm talking to men, you know. That's the language that I use, and I'm basically like, here's how you go out, grab a hold of your masculinity and make your life happen, you know.
No, I'm super excited. I'm going to get it for sure and have him read it. Yeah. Like this sounds like perfect for a young adult who's floundering. And there are a lot of those out there right now.
That is my target audience.
Okay.
Is young adult. Like I said, I just went and talked to kids graduating high school and going to talk to guys that are, you know, at colleges, like incoming freshman assemblies kind of thing. Like that's awesome. Like this is where I'm like, this is
so would you say this
but
is
then
kind
also
of... Go ahead.
I said, but then also obviously widows and widowers, right? It definitely applies to us. But unfortunately, most of the guys that were widowers that could relate to this, there's not very many of us.
Right.
You know, that's a much narrower audience. So I was originally like, I'm going to write a book to who I was, a young widower. But then as I started doing that, I'm like, there's a lot more people that this could help. So I'm going to say the same things, but not intentionally alienate everybody else by the way I talk about it.
No, that's so good. And that is very smart because even with book for widows, there's way more widows who read books than widowers. And my book is for men as well, but I know they're like 5% maybe of my audience. And so that was a very smart decision to make it broader, because if it was just for young widowers, that's such a small amount of people that it might have been harder to market it. So that's really a smart idea, having it for everybody. I'm very excited to get it and hopefully get my son to read it. I mean, I'm going to read it too. But he's specifically in that place where like he tried college for 2 years, wasn't really for him. Goes from job to job. I don't like this job. I don't like this job, you know, and just figuring out like his life.
College wasn't for me either. I went to 1 semester of college and I was like, screw this. This is not my thing. And I jumped into sales because I was learning on the job and I became very good at it. And then I went to trade school, you know, kind of, that's not even really college. That's just technical vocational training, you know, but it was where that trumpet was sounding from, and I made it work and made it happen. Speaking of your son, if I'm talking to young adults that are like, how do I, if I decide that this sounds good, like, how do I make sure that this works? Both times when I started in sales, you know, my start was door-to-door sales. So I was like baptism by fire kind of a thing into sales. But then also going back to school is like, I can't guarantee that I'm the smartest person in this room. There's no way I could guarantee that. I'd like to, I would hope that I am. That'd be nice, you know, but I can't guarantee that. The only thing that I can guarantee is that I'm going to outwork every other person in this room.
Yeah, you can.
And not in like a, like I'm better than everybody else, but this is like, if I'm going to have like some type of a competition that's motivating me, then I'm just going to take a look at everybody else. And like, how hard does it look like they're working? How hard does it seem like they're working? How much effort they're putting in, and make sure that nobody in this room is one-upping me on how much effort they're putting in.
Right. That's something you can control.
And I just made sure that I always felt like I am putting in more effort than anybody else here. And as long as I do that, I know it's going to work out. And it did. And I got an amazing job, and, you know, it was great. That also helps if you know you're actually going towards something that you'll enjoy. Yeah. You know, but yeah.
And so is this your passion now, like wanting to get your story out, and then this message of this book? Is that something like, if you didn't have to worry about like paying the bills, because we know it takes a while to build up books and speaking, like, would you do this full time? Or, I mean, is that like a dream you want to do this some full time?
Just if that worked out, like that would be the bee's knees.
Yeah, that's what I want to do.
That's where my heart comes alive.
Yeah.
That's where I get lit up, and like I would do it for free.
Right.
Like somebody comes and asks me to talk to a group of college kids, like, dude,
Yeah.
I'm all for
Yeah,
that.
me too.
As long as it's not negatively affecting family life or
Exactly.
finances, I'm going to do it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
That's how I feel
So,
too.
and I love the job that I have now. So like, I'm not in a hurry to quit
Yeah.
this job.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to let, however it happens. And if it ends up getting to that point where like I would be financially irresponsible to not do this
Yeah.
because it becomes very successful, then yeah, I'm going
Yeah.
to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I love it. Well, to wrap it up, I have a couple more questions. What advice would you give to a brand new widow or widower?
Well, I can't talk about any of my story without talking about God.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mentioned, one of the greatest pieces of advice, and it wasn't even specifically because I had lost my wife, it was well before that, was that when you're upset with God, you let him know.
Yes.
You don't ever shut that connection off with him, even though it
Right.
feels fragile. You can scream at him and tell him that you hate him, but keep yourself open to a response.
That's good.
And it'll be there as long as you're willing to hear it. And honestly, for a little bit, it was more like you know what, I'm just going to say some things. I don't want you to respond. I don't want to hear you. I don't even care right now, but I'm going to let you know this.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew I couldn't keep that up for forever, because if I kept that attitude for forever, I'd become a very bitter, resentful, hateful person.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's good advice.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend taking that approach, even though I did
Right.
for, maybe a couple weeks.
Yeah.
But,
no,
keep yourself open to that.
That's good. And what has been the most challenging part about being widowed?
There's a lot.
Right? I know it's hard to pick just one, or anything, like anything from your journey.
And it's also almost on the flip side of that spectrum, because my second wife saved me.
Mm-hmm.
That message alone is probably going to sting for some people that listen to this, because they haven't found that.
Right.
So there's probably going to be some jealousy there, and I totally understand that, because I had those feelings too. Every time after I lost my wife, every time I saw somebody with their wife,
right,
I was like, screw you guys.
I remember that
kind
feeling.
of in the back of my head there for a minute. And so some of those resentful feelings are definitely there, but that, I guess that's probably the answer to that question. The hardest part about being widowed was looking around at everybody being happy and me not being, and having it not be necessarily my fault. Like it just got ripped from me and I didn't have a say about it.
Yes.
And having to understand that, unfortunately, the way that this life goes, like, that's not anything personal to me. That's not anything, that I did anything to deserve that. But what it did was it gave me a very unique opportunity to develop myself to the point that I could be an example to millions of other people that would normally take a lifetime to learn what I've learned. Because eventually, most of it, like, we're all going to lose people very close to us eventually.
Yeah.
It might not happen until you're in your 50s or 60s that maybe you lose someone you love dearly, but it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? We're all going to experience that. So if you can, I guess, accept that, I learned that it just gives you an opportunity to really discover what matters and who you are. I think grief has this unique way of throwing you into the engine room of your soul, smashing that door open and chucking you inside of it. And you have an opportunity, once you're in there, to take a good look around at what's really inside of you and decide what needs tuned up, what you're going to keep, what you're going to throw away. And if you want to, you can quickly leave that room and seal that door shut and never go back.
True.
Or you can spend some time in there, work on some things, and then make a map on how to get back there.
That's so good. I love that. That's so great. Well, I'm so excited for your book to come out. So I'm guessing is it going to be on Amazon, or I know we'll have a link, but just so they know, where can they find it?
Yep, it's going to be on Amazon, and you can also go to my website. It's going to be on there. there's some other things that I'm doing too, if you don't mind me mentioning real
Yes,
quick,
please
that could be
do.
helpful.
Yeah.
So I'm just barely starting this up. So it's I don't even want to say it's in infancy. It's in it's in conception right now more than anything. And but we're going to be doing master classes where I talk about, you know, the whole drive
Yeah, I love
framework that we
that.
mentioned,
Uh-huh.
and like how do we actually apply this. So what I'm planning on doing, and my mother has actually joined me as a business partner. We just
Oh, I love
founded
it.
the Brandon Institute, and we're going to be doing coaching and stuff. And so we're building
Cool.
some of that out right now. But we're going to be doing uh, free masterclass on drive for
I
anybody that
love it.
wants to join in. Like every couple of weeks, probably. It's going to be a virtual thing. So if people want to follow me on my socials, that's Weston Brandon Speaker on pretty much any of them,
Okay.
or just Weston Brandon on Facebook. And there's a private Facebook group that I just barely started. There's maybe 15 people in it right now. But it's called the Overhaul Challenge. And that's what the masterclass is. Like, we're going to, every couple of weeks, I'm going to get on for 2 hours, and we're going to have a conversation about how drive applies to your life. And, you know, we're going to do some journaling and some deep looking into things. And then if people are like, I really need to go all in on this, then we're currently working on building a 5-day trip to Scotland to
Whoa.
go
Cool.
and like dive deeply into this stuff. And I'm going to bring in some professionals
That's
that can
awesome.
really help with that. And, you know, so doing doing some things that could be super helpful for, you know, if somebody needs to really invest in themselves, then
Yeah.
that's an opportunity for them to do that. Because I also found this is also a piece of advice that I give to some widows, is that if you find something that you think would really help you, but it costs a good chunk of change, that's almost an even greater opportunity. The fact that it costs money, because what I found in myself when I did that, and what I found in some other people, is that a lot of times the transformation in somebody's mind actually happens in the transaction.
Yep.
The moment they decide to actually invest in themselves,
Yes.
the shift happens when they make that decision. And then what they paid for is just supporting this new direction that they're taking.
That's
You
very
know,
true.
and that's, I found a lot of people have massive changes for positive in their life
Yeah.
when they go and dive into something like that.
Well, thank you. Well, it's been amazing hearing your story. I know that you're going to help a lot of people outside of widows too, widows and widowers, because of your book. I'm super excited. So is it okay if I end this by praying for you?
Absolutely. I would greatly appreciate
Okay.
that.
Dear God, I thank you so much for Weston. And I thank you for this journey he's been on, that you've been able to take something that's been so hard and turn it into something beautiful, a ministry to help other widows and widowers. I pray blessings over his new book, that it reaches even further than he could ask or imagine, and it becomes something that really propels him to what he wants to do with his life. I pray for more speaking and for his book to be a bestseller. I thank you for Kearsley and the kids. I pray blessings over them, and that peace will continue to cover their home. And just thank you for this, both of the beautiful marriages you've given him. And we just pray for all the listeners today, that they can find joy in whatever they're doing and find peace. And we just thank you for all you've done. Amen. Well,
Thank you.
You are welcome. If you like this podcast, give it a little bing, 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen. Make sure you check out my book in the link below. And for sure, Weston's, by the time this comes out, it'll have just released or will be releasing. I think it'll be live, the link. So go check out his book as well. And also, very important, please leave a review. Those help us the most on his book. You know, you got to have those planned to have those reviews. So leave him a review and leave me a review. And thank you guys for being here. And we'll see you next time. Bye.